All right, so hello everybody, and thank you for coming to CoHo BC's conversation on collective living with Collin van, he just corrected me, Uchelen. I got it wrong again. I apologize. We're really excited to have him here and have everybody here to talk about the collective nature of housing, of living community, of the advantages of that, and of course of the challenges around that. I'm going to start with a quick introduction to what is CoHo BC, who am I, and what brings us here today, and then we'll get into our conversation. Of course, we have to acknowledge that here in BC, we operate with understanding and deep gratitude that we live and work on the unceded territories of many, many peoples who were here before we got here. And these are only a few, and we thank them for this land that we share. So what is CoHo BC? What is this group that brought us together here today? So CoHo BC is an initiative aiming to promote co-ownership as a viable housing option here in British Columbia, to provide resources and professional support and assistance to those going through the co-ownership process, to assist in the creation of co-ownership groups through a dating pool, a chance to meet other like-minded individuals or families, to create co-ownership buyer groups, and to work on the facilitation and the resale of shared property interests and to other co-buyers and partners in this situation. So who we are as a group, we're a collection of professionals who have experience with collective ownership, collective living, collective understanding of how real estate can work and how housing can accomplish more if we think together. We're realtors, such as myself, lawyers, builders, financial institutions, architects, mediators, and just people who have an interest and a knowledge in this. And that's where Collin joins us, for example. And we're all with experience and expertise in collective housing and co-ownership. So we figure if you're going to do this, don't reinvent the wheel. Use people who've done it and set yourself up for success. So who am I? What brings me to this? My name, again, is Noam Dolgan. I'm a realtor here in Metro Vancouver with a background in sustainability and really bringing that mindset around community, environmental, and fiscal sustainability into real estate. I specialize in co-ownership, of course, sustainable living, green homes, first-time buyers, basically real homes for real people, and thinking outside the box of how we can look at housing differently. And before I got into real estate, as I said, I worked in environmental education, community greening, and in community engagement positions throughout the community. And I lived in a variety of collective homes, and so I understand the beauty and some of the challenges of it. So what is real estate co-ownership? This is nothing new, and certainly neither is collective living. Before 1966, there was no Strata Act in BC, so if you wanted to own parts of a building, you had to own it as shares. In the 70s, we had co-ops pop up, both ownership and rental co-ops all across Metro Vancouver. In the more recent time, we've had co-housing and collective homes of a variety of sorts, co-investment, intergenerational families, timeshare properties, and of course, all stratified condos, duplexes, townhomes are co-owned to some degree. And even when you own your own property, when you have neighbors, there's some degree of collectivity. So there are huge advantages to knowing those people and addressing some of those things in advance. So why would you want to co-own? There's a number of reasons. We'll come back to more of them later, but the basic ones people get into co-ownership are to build community. Same thing with why they want to live collectively, mutual support systems, get more for your money, live in otherwise unavailable locations, like single family neighborhoods that are generally not stratified and open to apartments and the like. And as I mentioned, know your neighbors before you buy, understand what you're getting into, understand the relationships, understand who they are, and know that you guys are a good synergistic community. So who looks at co-ownership and who looks at different forms of collectivity? At CoHo, we have a lot of interest from intergenerational families, so parents and their children and grandchildren, young families trying to be able to support each other and to get more space, first-time home buyers trying to get into the market. So instead of getting a one bedroom, they're sharing 2 bedrooms or homes or townhouses. Downsizers and older adults who don't need all that space, or they really want some support and community in their older age. And people looking to live collectively, as we'll hear about more. Investors, as I like to say, anyone who can think collectively and outside the box can look at co-ownership as a viable option for them. One of the big questions I always get is how much to share. And that's, of course, up to you. And this is the case in any collective housing situation. It's going to be based on your needs, your desires, your budget, and your property. So do you share the land and the ownership only? But everyone has a private suite with a private kitchen and bathroom. That's the majority of the work that we do here at CoHo BC. But more and more, we're seeing a lot of interest in people looking to live collectively with shared kitchens and bathrooms and living space. That certainly creates more affordability, more community support. And no matter how you choose that way, how do you want to use collective spaces, yards, sheds, laundries, out homes, buildings, and how do you want to share stuff and supplies, equipment, and are you going to put in that shared hot tub that everyone dreams of? So what co-ownership can look like really does depend on you. In Vancouver, for people who want different suites, we often see people looking at Vancouver specials, houses with laneway homes, or multi-suited homes that have been cut up as rental suites over the years. And for communal living, people really want to live together. There's a number of options in terms of sharing houses, townhouses, condos, really any size home you can make work for you depending on your needs and your community. So for just some quick math around this, if you look at what it would cost I like to use East Vancouver as an example, but of course these numbers scale depending on where you're going. An introductory one-bedroom condo in East Vancouver is around the $500,000 to $600,000 range these days. And so you can co-own a 900 square foot 2-bedroom, for $700,000 to $800,000 and be in for a much lower entry price. You can get 2 or 3 people together and go look at townhomes. Townhomes are great often if they're 3 stories. So somebody's on the ground floor with their own private bathroom and maybe sitting area. A couple is on the top floor with their own private bathroom sitting area. And then they share the main floor. And then of course, houses, 4, 5, 6-bedroom homes, they scale up in size and they change in price. But basically you can drive your price per square foot down from, the $800 a square foot range you're paying for a condo to $600 a square foot range you're paying for a large house. Plus, you're not just getting your tiny little space, you're getting large living rooms and dens and storage sheds and workshops and yards and all those other shared amenities. So you get much more for your money. Examples of collective homes. This is happening all over the place. One of the most famous examples right now are they call themselves the Golden Girls of Port Perry, Ontario. This is the cover of the Ontario Guide to Co-Ownership. And these are 4 women who've bought a house together. And we have many examples of collective living in Vancouver, and Collin will talk more about it. These are a couple pictures that I found of different models here in the city itself. So again, one of the advantages, know your neighbors, get support, save money, get more space, share resources, higher quality of housing otherwise not available, like laneway homes, financial and social synergy, and I like to say triple bottom line sustainability. So really we're thinking about our social, our fiscal, and our environmental footprints, psychology, well-being, choices in all of this, and living collectively really deals with all of that at the same time. There are some challenges, both collectively living and collectively renting or collectively owning. When you own collectively, you have the financing and mortgage in common. You have to understand your exit strategy. You have to know how to deal with ongoing disagreements and questions around cleanliness and repair and noise. And you have to find the right partners. And so a well thought through, deliberate process, and in co-buying, certainly a well-crafted legal agreement, partnership agreement that outlines everyone's responsibilities and everyone's goals and timelines and an exit strategy. And we have many sessions at CoHo that go into much more detail about how to do that right. But I think Collin's talking about this more in advance. If you have a deliberative process and you know in advance going in and you choose the right people and you think well in advance, problems don't tend to occur. But if you jump right into it and then try to figure it out after, that's when you can have much bigger challenges. So as I said, we do have a whole series of events, and some of this is on YouTube and some of this was coming up. So please, if you want to know much more about co-ownership, about CoHo, about what we do, come to one of our future events or be in touch with us, and we can fill you much more in. But that's not why you came here today. We didn't come to learn what is co-ownership. That's another session. We came today to talk with Collin and hear about his experience with collective living, and with the challenges and the joys of such things. So Collin, thank you so much for joining us and taking the time this evening. Welcome. I have to unmute you probably.
Okay.
There we go.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for being here.
It's great to be here. Thank you so much, Noam.
So why don't you start off, just tell us a little bit about yourself, your work, and your housing.
Okay. Well, my field of work is in the discipline of community psychology, and I have a PhD in clinical and community psychology, and most of my interest and my professional activities, as well as sort of my lived experience in shared living, is in community psychology. And what I do is I work as a consultant, and I've done some work with the Vancouver Foundation in their Neighborhood Small Grants program, and I've also done a fair amount of work with Provincial Health on their Indigenous health program and their Indigenous cultural safety work. And the area that I think is one of the most exciting and joyful to me is the work I've done with a workshop I've created called The Heart of Belonging. And this is a workshop which really takes a look at the experience of community and connection we have with other people in our lives. And that experience of connection might occur in our households, it could be in our neighborhood, in the context of some organization or group that we are a member of. And it's a topic of interest to me personally, because it's really, I think, what brought me into shared and collective and communal living. It's really that feeling of belonging, the feeling of connection, the experience of fellowship and friendship and camaraderie that I have with other people in the context of a shared home is where it's at for me. And that's, I think, why I've found my way into this way of living and have been there ever since. And it's about that experience. And I think we'll touch more on that later in the talk. And so in terms of how I do live, I've been living in shared homes for quite some time now. And usually it's in the context of a shared detached home where we might share a number of resources, kitchen, living space, bathrooms, what have you, and usually with, a small group of other adults. And it's my preferred way of living and enjoying my day-to-day life.
Wonderful. Well, thank you.
What?
So, all right. So let's go into that. You have long chosen to live collectively. So what draws you personally to that choice, to that style of housing?
I've already touched on that sense of community that comes out of it. And I think for me, that's one of the primary motivations for it, is I really do love that experience of connection. And there's other things I love about it too. One is something you've touched on already, Noam, and that is through sharing resources, I gain access to so much more than what I could possibly ever have access to as an individual, both in terms of the size of a home I can live in, the yard that I can have at my disposal, the shared resources, whether it be, the kitchen utensils and the garden tools and the stereo, the fireplace, whatever it might be that, collectively it enables me access to, whereas individually it would just be out of reach for me. And a sort of a flip side of that is that through sharing then too, I also can live a little bit more lightly and more gently on the earth. So like in the context of my shared home, we all don't need to own our own toaster or own our own whatever it might be, appliance, implement, tool, that kind of thing. We can share them, and then it just reduces I think the burden on the planet, and the burden a little bit on our own lives in terms of individual ownership of stuff.
Yeah, for sure. And having had many different roommates over the years, or housemates, I should say, what different things beyond that do you think is drawing them, or what of those are the primary factors you think drawing people to live, and I guess to stay collectively? Probably certain people show up and then it ends up not being right for them. So I guess both what keeps people, what draws people, and then why do you think people don't end up lasting in that type of housing?
It's I think what draws people actually a lot of, and this is in my experience, is the promise of having a sense of community. And I think sometimes people have a life within which they feel a little disconnected, a little isolated, and they so want to belong and so want to have more of a kind of a sense of family or sense of community in the context of a living space. And so I think that draws them in. And yet I also think that sometimes their undoing may be that they kind of don't really see how that comes about, and that it does take a bit of work, I think, to create that experience and then to sustain it over time in the context of shared living. Yeah.
So let's talk about those challenges. I mean, the things that get in the way of sustaining the relationship. What do you think are the biggest challenges, and what do you do to kind of avoid those problems or alleviate them before they occur, ideally?
Well, let me tell a story about a person I used to live with, and who came into the house, just loved it, was very keen. We were very keen on her. She was, had lots of sparkle, energy, and after a few weeks of living here, maybe three weeks of living here, she said to us at one night, over dinner, she said, "This is the best place ever that I've lived in. This is so perfect," And I was feeling like, great, that's really lovely to hear when someone new moves in. And she said, "And the thing that I love the most about this house is everything gets taken care of on its own. Yeah, actually, you don't need to do anything because it all just gets handled. It's just." And so she told us this, like, with all the sincerity and warmth, and I think she really was appreciative. And I think that was her perspective and her experience on life in terms of the household. And as it turned out, she turned out to be a really terrible roommate for us. Exactly, because the thing she appreciated was that she didn't have to do anything. That was also the thing that made it not work, is because she didn't do anything. And I think that's sort of what it takes to sustain life in a shared kind of context is you need to do your part. And so I think that's one of the lessons that has come out of those kind of experiences, is that while it looks like everything works magically, actually there are people who vacuum and who cook and who do this, and to wash, wipe the countertops and pay the bills and, pull the weeds and all these kind of things. And so it takes that sort of contribution of energy and effort, I think, to pull it all together. Yeah.
And for it to work magically, everybody has to do it. Otherwise, you have the tragedy of the commons.
Yeah, I think so. Like, I think you can kind of slide by, if you live with 5 adults, you can kind of slack off a little bit and kind of make it like appear like you're doing your part, and kind of, slide through with a bit of loafing. But I don't think it's healthy, and I don't think it's sustainable. So, like, I think what we have here is what I call cooperative structures, and they're actually sort of like a framework of participation that enables us to kind of stay connected, to do part of what it takes to make the whole thing work. And I think it also facilitates people making that contribution of time, of energy, of input into the household that actually makes it a more fulfilling experience, over the long run. That when you do make that contribution, a bit of a gift of your time, that it becomes more fulfilling.
Well, it definitely, I think it feels like it, if you contribute and then you see somebody else contribute on top of it, you see your impact multiplied. I think it's really satisfying. And you see that even in the most basic two-person partnership, shared collective household, when you see your partner contribute, encourages you to contribute back, and it really supports that.
Yeah. And then you get that synergy that you referred to earlier in your introduction. And it's lovely, and it can be astounding what you can accomplish when you have several people just pitching in. And this is not anything unique to collective living. It happens in work teams and organizations and choirs and musical groups and all kinds of collective efforts, wherever they might be. But it can be just a really lovely thing to experience in the context of one's household too. And it just enables you to achieve so much more than what otherwise would be possible. And you can have so much more fun in doing it too.
So when there are issues, what do you advise around resolution? Do you do you believe in consensus models? Do you believe in majority models? Do you think you have to personalize it? Does every collective need to create their own model? What's your solution for creating resolution?
Well, it's been a little bit different in the different collectives I've been part of, and then in the context of my current living arrangement, it's shifted over time here, and I think that we came to a conclusion collectively at some point that doing everything by consensus really didn't kind of make sense, because there are several decisions. Like I remember once clearly we had this kind of conversation about how much to trim, the hedges out front, and how far back to cut them. And, they were big and they were wild. And so it was this kind of whole collective enterprise, and all this effort and work went into it. And ultimately, it seemed like it really didn't matter, that the energy that went into it, didn't, it didn't make a difference. And so in the context of my own PhD research, and this was about shared living, cooperatives and people's experience of empowerment in their lives. And one of the participants in the interview, she said that what they used is, she had this metaphor of like a necklace with beads on it. And she said sometimes a decision means that you own input might be more important than someone else's, because it's a choice that really matters to you personally. Even though it's sort of occurring in the context of the group, an individual just might want to have a little bit more weight. And so we refer to that then as like a bigger bead item, And so if, for me, like in the context of our household, if this is like about, I don't know, let's say, what kind of firewood we get, and because I'm kind of manage that, and I would just like, this is a big bead item for me. And so people would recognize like, okay, this matters more to Collin than it might matter to themselves. And so that kind of people would sort of step back a little bit and allow me to have that kind of voice in it. And so it's kind of like a modified consensus way. And it's incumbent upon each of us then in those kind of decisions to recognize like, hey, maybe this is really important to somebody else, not so important to me. I'll let them kind of carry the day here, and I can just kind of stand back a little bit from, the decision, the engagement and those choices.
And I assume there's some decisions that are not up for constant renegotiation. There's some basic house rules, maybe decisions that were made early on that are kind of untouchable in terms of foundational to your communities.
Yeah, not a whole lot, but some of them, like some of the basic cooperative structures, that I referred to earlier, like those kind of are part of the glue, that we share our food, for example, and that we share meals together several times a week. And I think that's pretty foundational. And in the past, we've had some people who, for one or another reason, have sort of opted out of food sharing or opted out of meal sharing. And we find in no time, they start to kind of disconnect from the household and eventually, end up leaving, because the food sharing and the meal sharing is part of the structure that glues us together, I think, and enables us to connect. And we share our stories about how our lives are going, and we make minor little decisions over the day, or about the daily affairs of life household, sometimes in the context of dinner. And so those kind of things, I think, are a big part of it. Yeah. And then other decisions, such as, like, are we going to be vegetarian or not? That shifted over time, and it kind of depends on the dietary habits of who's here and how we want to navigate that and negotiate that as a group collectively. So I think that the enduring ones are the ones that really matter in terms of giving us our sense of connection and community. And the sharing, I think, is a really foundational element of that.
Yeah. So you talk about your model being based, or part of it being based, around the sharing of food and meals, and you've talked about other elements to me privately about kind of the deliberate nature of how you choose your tenants, or your roommates, I should say. I guess, are there other models, collective housing models, that you've seen that are good models for success, or that you like people could copy and replicate?
Well, I think there's a whole variety of different ways that people sort of engage in shared living and do it together. And I've known of households that are sort of they have way more house meetings. For example, they would have weekly house meetings, and they would have, a chunk of that meeting really devoted to kind of a check-in and where people are at emotionally and, in their own sort of personal growth. And I've known of other households who do that, and then also really have sort of a shared value of maybe political activism or kind of a social justice agenda that would be sort of shared interest to the people in the households. Other households might share similar spiritual foundations or spiritual practice, whatever they might be, yoga or meditation or some kind of other practice. And so in terms of that, I think it's useful to have common ground on the point of some values that really matter. And I also think it's useful to be open to the idea that not everyone's going to share every value that might be of interest to you. So, like, I've have my own personal values, and there have been other people who live in the household who might have different values, even politically or socially, or in terms of where they what they really care about, where they're at spiritually, where they're at within respect to environmental issues. And I think they can still work out as great roommates and great housemates, and we can have a great time together. So, I think for me, what is really important is to look at, well, how do people actually behave? Like, what do they actually do in the context of their day-to-day life in a shared place? That's the kind of stuff that matters. And so, Noam, if that's okay, I'd like to maybe describe a little bit of our process here on how we do that. And because I think this would also have some implications for if you're considering owning a place with other people in your life. And I think over time that we've become a bit more selective when it comes to the process of finding a new person to join the collective. And it's a several step approach. And we essentially just begin by putting an ad up where we describe a little bit of who we are and how we are and what we are as households. And we say, hey, just send us a note, just tell us a bit about your shared living experience and what appeals to you about our ad, we'll take it from there. And then we see people who reply, in that way, great. Then we call them, and then we have another conversation. And in that conversation, we do just a bit of screening. We make sure, like, hey, are they okay with the shared food? And this is, we're looking for someone who's a non-smoker, et cetera, and so forth, and someone who doesn't have allergies, for example, to dogs. I myself have a guide dog for the blind. I'm visually impaired, so that might be, if I'm not looking at the screen, that would be why. But we handled that telephone screening interview, and if it goes well, then we say, okay, well, maybe we'll have you come over and take a look at the place. And in the screening process, if people are only concerned about what the rent is, or only concerned about their own self-interest, and not really about what we share in common here, then they get weeded out, like, at each step of the way. So then the third step would be, they come, they look at the place, and they get a feel for the room that would be available. And it's not just the room, it's the whole house, right? If you move in and join us, you're moving into the collective, as a shared space. And so, the garden, the shed, the garage, so, the work areas, all that kind of stuff are grist for the mill. And if they like the place and the lay of the land, and we have a good impression of them, then we say, hey, come back for dinner, and then we'll have a longer conversation about life here. And so that usually is a really nice moment. And when people come to dinner, we spend 2-3 hours over dinner just talking about how things go, and they tell us about their lives. And then if that looks good, and if they're really keen, then our final step is we say, come have a sleepover and stay, 2-3 nights with us. And then at that point, we just say, when you come to stay here, we want you to kind of live your life as normally as you would. That is, if you go to work, go to work. If you do other things during the day, do the things you do. And we try to do the same here on our end, in the household. We kind of live our life as we normally would, just so that we get a good feel for what they might be like, and they might get a better feel for what life would actually be like in the context of this place and this home. And because I think fundamentally, the more clarity that everyone has on what we're signing up for and what we're moving into, the better it will be. And at some point, or with some people at that point, they might say, yeah, that's not quite for me, too much this or not enough of that. And other people will just say, wow, this is great. I love it. This is exactly what I'm looking for. And then it usually goes pretty good if once we've gotten that far. So our selection, really, we're trying to be sort of focused and upfront about that, and intentional in making sure we try to land on a page where people can really see, what we're about, and vice versa.
Collin, question from the chat. No questionnaire or deeper interview? I mean, are you grilling them over dinner?
Yeah, we don't have a questionnaire, but we talk over dinner, and the telephone thing, it's a bit of an interview. It's just a bit of a screening interview. And I'll if I'm doing it, I'll ask, like, tell me more about your shared living, and why you're looking to move at this time, and like, what's what are you hoping for, and what would your ideal living situation be like? I do ask those questions. Yeah, but I think toward the end of our process, and I'll speak for myself because I'm a psychologist by training, right? I really look at people's behavior then, because we've certainly had experiences in the context of our house where people have said lovely stuff, and we get so excited as a group. We think, we found the perfect person, they're a godsend, right? Because they've said everything that sounds perfect, and how they're really into cleaning, and they're really into this, and really into sharing, and love togetherness, and really take initiative, and whatever, and they said all the right words. But then when they move in, we think, well, wait a minute, the person who kind of described themselves and the person who's here sort of don't sound like the same person. And so I think a lot can be learned, but just by really paying attention of, like, okay, how are they showing up in the context of the space in the house? Are they leaving dirty dishes behind, during those 2-3 days that they're visiting here? If they are, that's kind of an indication of what you're likely to get in the future. are they keeping off to themselves? Are they behind closed door most of the time? If they are, what you see is what you're likely to get. So I think at that point, that might sound sort of, I don't know, exacting on my part, but I think it's really the way people kind of show up in their lives in terms of their behavior and how they act. That's kind of the best predictor of what you're likely to get when you move in together.
Another question down here: with a couple night trial, do you find, in this deliberative process, do you find you usually have a room empty for a month or two between housemates?
Yes, sometimes that occurs, and certainly with COVID on the go, that's really thrown a spanner into the works as far as that goes. But in our house too, we also have a guest room, and so we, when we have people over, they can spend the night in the guest room, and then so that might occur before the room is actually vacant. That we would be sort of putting up for rent, so to speak. But on other times, no, then the room might be vacant for a month or so.
So I'm going to take a step back for a moment and just go into the co-ownership model, because there's a question early on about reselling of shares in a collectively owned home. And we'll talk a little more about ownership stuff, but that's not the experience that you have. Yours are collective rental homes, as I understand it.
Yeah.
But I will say that what I've seen a lot of with these collective homes is where they can be owned collectively and they can be occupied collectively, and that oftentimes these two entities are two separate entities. Actually, there's a great article out of San Francisco about a model like this, but I see it here. There's a few examples on Commercial Drive where the people who rent in the house maybe own a share of the house as small as $1,000, but basically they pay rent to the landlord, which is the collective owners of the property. And those are going to be both probably one main owner who's kind of the head of this initiative, some of the other renters who might be minor owners, and then often crowdsourced and friends and other sources like that. So to speak to, there's a number of models. Everyone who's in the collective home could be the shared owners. You could all own a quarter of the home and all go in together, or you can buy in according to your ability, rent according to your ability, have the rent pay the costs and pay the investors, and separate the collective home from the collective owners. So there's a couple models out there in terms of ownership, and we'll get more into that a little bit potentially down the road.
Mm-hmm.
Any thoughts around that? It's a bit of an aside. For
me, well, there is a model here in Vancouver too, where a collective owns several properties, and that the different properties might arrange themselves differently in terms of how much shared space they want to have, or whether they want to kind of be just sort of renters more or less within the context of a home. And so in one of the properties there is a collective house structured very similar to ours in terms of sharing food, sharing meals, taking turns cooking, sharing the household chores and responsibility. But there, the people who are there, they essentially are tenants or renters. They're paying rent. But what they do have, while their rent is not building equity, they do have security in terms of knowing that property is never going to be sold out from beneath them. And so they could live there for the rest of their lives. And, I know one or two people who that's their ambition is to do that because it really works for them. They like it. It's less expensive. And then all the maintenance costs, say if they need a new roof or whatever, those come out of the larger budget that's owned by the collective that owns all the properties in common.
Thank you. And I think Liza offered to give a little insight. I mean, there are whole sessions that we're doing here at CoHo about kind of sale and partnership agreements and legal stuff, and we can go into much more detail on this basic concept. But generally, right, you're going to find the value of your property, find someone else who's going to be a good fit, and sell it off to them. And it sounds like Liza has experience with that. So I'll ask her to unmute herself and share a little bit.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Collin. Awesome to see you. Full disclosure, I know Collin well. I have stayed at the guest house in the guest room. I stayed with him and all of the members of the collective over the years, and it's always been a great experience. And yeah, it's just a great place to land, and awesome to see Collin online answering all these great questions. So I just thought I'd quickly add in just my 2 cents to help with the co-ownership, co-rental kind of merging piece. I had a house in Victoria, and we had 3 people who owned the house. And then we had renters, and we had 2 people who lived in it for a while who owned it. And so basically how we did it was we basically said, when we're having meetings, you're wearing your ownership hat or you're wearing your tenant hat. So each time you're looking at the house, are you looking at it as a person who owns part of the house and you're managing the asset of the house? Or are you looking at it from the perspective of you're a tenant in the house with other tenants and you're wearing your tenant hat? So it's just in terms of like keeping things really separate, right? So sometimes you do end up with people owning and renting, and then people who own maybe don't live in the house. So it's really important to separate it out and make it very clearly separate and get those agreements in place up front. So for example, if someone's going to be a co-owner on a property and live in it, and then someone's going to be a co-owner but not live in it, what rent do you come to agreement on that's fair for the person who's part owner and a tenant? So all of those things are, because you've got both of those things mixing, kind of getting murky in the water, you really need to sit down and work out agreements in advance. So, I know we'll get into more detail in that in the future, but just thought I'd add that in. Just think about your separate hats, your ownership hat and your tenant hat.
Thank you. And clearly, when you're getting into this as a co-owner, it's a bigger financial investment and a harder headache when you choose to get out.
Yeah.
But that being said, I mean, to Collin, we have a question here about, do you do trial rental agreements, right? Do you once you let people in, you kind of have a legal right, they have a legal right to the suite for the long term. So do you do a short-term fixed-term tenancy to get them right first, or do you just commit, and so is it actually that much different than co-buying in that sense, right? You really are committing to them as their home.
Well, no, we say, look, when you come into the house, our hope is that it's going to work and that you're going to live here for years. That's kind of what the energy we put out there. But we say, we'll consider the first couple of months just like a trial period, and if you find it doesn't work for you, and it's not a good fit, then we'll just cut our losses. You get your deposit back, no big deal. That kind of thing.
Do you have a legal agreement to protect yourself from that, considering tenancy law doesn't allow you to just say it's not a big deal, sorry, why don't you move out?
We have an agreement with the owner, but amongst ourselves, no. And I'm not sure about how that goes. Yeah.
No, I know they wouldn't be added to the lease, but as a sublease, even a tenant would have, if they move in and you decide it's not the right fit for you, but they decide it's perfect for them. I mean, I hope someone who would choose to move into collective housing would also be willing to move out if it's not the right collective. They would have the proper mindset, and they're not going to be a problem about it. But I'm just wondering if you've done anything to explore any legal protections of once you let somebody in. The tenancy rights generally protect the tenant, even the subtenant, in this situation.
Yeah. So it's an interesting point. Like I've never had it in all the years that I've been living communally, and that's several, that someone hasn't wanted to leave, but others did want them to leave. But it's And in some ways, I kind of think, like, yeah, maybe some folks have been in the home longer and others are kind of just coming into it. But in terms of like our status, when we're in the home together, like nobody has lesser or more sort of legal status, I think, that we're all just kind of tenants together, where it's all kind of like we're roommates. Yeah.
So anyways, we're getting a little bit caught up in the legal weeds, but
yeah. And I think in many ways it's the care we take up front, which is really helpful. Like, and we really are looking for people who kind of get what we're doing and the way we're doing it. And yeah, so for the most part, I think we've been pretty lucky and then when it's not a good fit, it's really been pretty mutual. Sometimes we say, hey, it looks like this isn't working out great. You're kind of spending all your time in your room or whatever. And it's typically kind of a mutual thing. Yeah.
This is one of the challenges that the co-ops have, right? The co-ops were set up under this cooperative nature, but they've lost many of their cooperative natures because over time they just become affordable housing in the heart of the city. And so the question is, how do you maintain that cooperative nature? But I think it's a little easier when you're all living together. Really, it's right there in your face. That's the base of the home.
Yeah, it is. But although there are many, many shared homes where, like you have 4 or 5 people living together in the same single family house, and everybody's on their own program. Everybody has their own chunk of food. Everybody, cooks when they want. They do what they, they're just kind of having their own life, and they might sort of overlap a little bit from time to time or watch a show on TV or whatever it might be. But I think for us, that's why we just have these kind of cooperative structures in place. And I think it really helps so much. I think the food sharing and the meal sharing on occasion just really helps distinguish this from just a place where a bunch of people happen to live that's more affordable than it otherwise would be if they lived on their own.
So you referenced a few collective houses in Vancouver, some examples, and you were a co-founder of the Vancouver Collective Houses Network, which I believe now is the Vancouver Collective Housing Society. What was your vision when that came to be? What do you feel like you guys accomplished over the years, and what do you know about the vision of the organization today?
Well, my vision for when I started it was to have just a bit of a loose association through which collectives could sort of get together and share information if we're looking for a new member to join, or if someone's looking for a place to move into, that we could have a way to kind of share that information with one another easily, and also learn from each other. And because there's so much shared and experiential wisdom that comes out of having lived experience living communally, because people sometimes have brilliant ideas on whether it's as simple as how to organize the fridge or how to organize the food shopping, to what they do about dishes and cleanup and all that kind of stuff. So when I started the network, my vision was to have a potluck here, to invite anyone who lived in any kind of collective or shared home I knew about, and ask them to invite anyone that they knew about, and that we would just then rotate the home that the potlucks occurred in 4 times a year. So it'd just be seasonal. And then a different collective would host the potluck, and people from all the other collectives who wanted to come would come. We'd have a shared meal. We do the potluck thing, which collective people know how to do. And then, we get a house tour, learn a little bit about that, how that household worked. And then we would meet one another, and we do a bit of a go around where people would say who they are and what household they're from, and whether they're looking or whether a household is looking for someone new. And so it was a great way just to kind of share those experiences together. And that's how we did it for years. And so it was pretty loose. We had a bit of an email listserv that sort of kept us organized, and we would post ads if we're looking for new roommates and whatever. And then slowly over time, it kind of morphed into sort of a Facebooky kind of space. And then sort of because of my sight loss, I sort of lost touch of that particular forum. And then it kind of morphed into a society, which when it was formed, there was a lot of energy about sort of activism and really advocating for shared housing and, kind of formalizing the organizational structure around the network, and which I was fine with. But, to be frank, I was just happy with how we originally organized ourselves as just this kind of loose association. So that's still where my energy is in terms of the collective housing network. And I think that's, so we still host one of the potlucks annually here at our home, and we put it out to the network and the society and say, hey, if you want to come, come. And so it's kind of old-fashioned, old school, and it's simple. And I really like that. And I like it too, because it doesn't take a lot of energy into maintaining the organization itself, because sometimes when you create a big organization, it sort of consumes energy and to keep itself afloat. And that sometimes can get in the way of achieving other goals and ideals.
You referenced advocacy, and so I'm going to just jump off that for a minute. Do you have any experience with the city's anti-rooming house, anti-boarding house bylaws? And is that a challenge? I mean, Vancouver has it. Most of the municipalities around Metro Vancouver have rules, people don't know, that limit how many unrelated adults can live in a home or in one suite in a home. And it was used as part of how zoning was used for many generations as socioeconomic and racial warfare, used to keep boarding houses and brothels and other types of and rental housing out of single family neighborhoods. They're still on the books in most of the municipalities. Does that become a challenge that you've experienced?
I think it does. It's not for us because we're within the limits, but I know of other collectives who are have been above the limit and have been shut down because of that, like completely shut down as a household, which in some ways to me seems ironic given the talk we have about the importance of affordable housing, and yet to have a policy that sort of will take some affordable housing options out of availability because they were in violation of that the zoning bylaw there. And so I know of other collectives that fly under the radar, and they would just keep quiet about it, and fair enough, yeah. So I think it's really is an opportunity for the city to look at that bylaw and to look at the interest in affordable housing and bring those two kind of more in alignment with one another.
Thank you. So just some little pro tips from you. So let's say me and 4 of my buddies want to go get a house together. What kind of 5 things would you warn us about or advise us up front to make sure we set ourselves up for success?
Live together first. That's what I would really suggest. Start living together. Find a place to rent. Yeah, it's not going to be your ideal, or it might not be what you're looking for, but at least begin having that kind of experience of shared living, and then have some simple and clear structure around what you might want to share it, and if it's going to be food, or some shared meals or whatever, and have it be doable, manageable, simple, but sort of a core kind of framework. And I say that I see that as very different than making up sort of a whole list of rules and policies and regulations about what is okay and what isn't okay. I think that can be really kind of restrictive and constrictive and without joy. And so, like, my preference is to have less of the rules, but just to have those basic cooperative structures about what you're going to share. and do that. And so I would say for a group of people seeking and imagining living together, start renting together, start with having some conversations about what would be just a few basic things that you would do intentionally when it comes to sharing, and work out a framework of how to do that. So if you are going to share food, then you kind of need to know, well, what's your common ground going to be? You know, will you be vegetarian or omnivorous or whatever it might be? And, you know, those things matter to a lot of people because it's what sustains us in terms of our food and our diet. And then you kind of work out your agreements around that and give it a whirl. It doesn't mean, like, if you share meals, it doesn't mean you need to kind of share a lot of intimacy in other ways, or you don't need to hang out together all the time, but at least you have some kind of commonality that will bring you together in a way that's pretty uncomplicated. And most people in most of the planet know how to share food together. And so it's a good place to begin.
Do you see any differences for a group of, you know, millennials versus a group of downsizers or retirees, and how they would want to approach the situation?
Yeah, I don't know. You know, it might be folks, you know, with a little bit more lived experience would maybe just have different things that matter to them. But I don't know if there's any fundamental differences. I'm not sure. I've heard that younger folks maybe have a less of an investment in owning things, right? They're fine, you know, with just not owning it, or borrowing or sharing or whatever. And in some ways that can work really well in the context of collective living, where, you know, a lot of it that you wouldn't necessarily need to own on your own, but living together and sharing together does involve a little bit of responsibility for taking care of that, you know, the common good or the common property. Yeah, it's an interesting question.
I'm definitely seeing a lot of focus in the older generation about mutual responsibility, right? Wanting to live collectively for mutual support. And so I feel like the goals of what brings you together as a community may be different, and therefore the systems you set up may end up being different, I would assume, given your objectives in life.
Yeah. And where you are in your life too. And like we've heard, you know, like I've spoken about the household to many people, and sometimes I think, oh my God, you share your food? Like, oh, like I would never do that. Like, what if somebody makes pasta and like I feel like, you know, having potatoes, you know, and that sort of the issues of control and personal choice are so important to some individuals that they have a hard time seeing their way into the benefit that can come out of sharing. And, you know, what I think about is like, wow, like I love the freedom that comes from me not having to worry about cooking several nights a week, not having to worry about doing everything on my own and myself, and not having to be the one responsible for everything, because I can share that. And so I think sometimes it's a little bit of lived life experience that enables someone to see the benefit of sharing that can come out of not having, yeah, maybe you give up a little bit of choice on what you're going to eat, you know, one night when someone else is cooking, but it's, you know, it's kind of like living in the context of a family. But it's different insofar as that this becomes our chosen family, rather than the family we just happen to be born into.
Before we get on to questions, do you want to tell us a little bit about your consulting work and kind of what exciting stuff you're up to and you're trying to pioneer these days?
Well, sure. The one thing I spoke about it at the beginning, which is the part of the work that I really enjoy the most, is I have created a participatory interactive workshop called The Heart of Belonging, which really is an examination of that experience of belonging that we have with others. And in what the workshop does is it provides kind of a fun way to really start to look at, well, what makes that experience happen? Like, you know, when you feel at home, when you feel connected, when you feel like you belong, why does that come about? Like, what are the elements that contribute to that experience, because sometimes we have it and it just feels magical because it just seems to occur and we love it, and then other times it just doesn't gel and we're kind of like disappointed, but not really thinking about, well, what does it make to what does it take, and is there a bit of a recipe that we can use to guide us as individuals in creating that experience, not just for ourselves, but for other people who are part of the groups that we belong to, whether they be households or other contexts, neighborhoods in the community. And so the Heart of Belonging workshop then provides a framework to look at what some of the things are that kind of help make that experience occur. And in the context of the workshop, over the course of time, people start to feel more connected with one another in the room just through participating in the workshop. And the workshop is designed that way so that we actually implement the very ideas that we're talking about to kind of create that experience of connection with one another, and end up kind of finding out like it's really not rocket science, like it is doable, and it's doable in the context of a diverse group of people, that there are certain things, certain points of common ground that we can kind of build on to create that experience of connection with one another in the room. And then hopefully, like my desire for that, or my ambition, my mission, is that people take that knowledge with them out into the world, and they use it to create more of a sense of community in the context of whatever community it is that they're part of, and where it matters that they have that experience, where they want to coax that experience of connection and belonging, or bring that into the context of whatever that group is. We're all part of communities, but not all communities matter so much to us as individuals. We're all parts of neighborhoods, and sometimes our neighborhood, that's really not where we're seeking to have a big experience of connection and fulfillment, and that's fine. But sometimes we do want to have that within the context of our neighborhood, and so that kind of information and material and sort of experiential learning is useful to do that. So that's the thing in terms of my consulting work. I think that's one of the things that I'm most excited about doing and contributing to. And of course, now with COVID, this whole thing is kind of being rejigged, and I will be experimenting with an online version of the workshop next month. And it's going to be a test run, a trial run, and then I can let you know how it goes. And hopefully we can achieve some of what we achieve in person in the context of a online meeting. Yeah.
And I'll just build off that with one more thing, is that I think we've been seeing a lot of interest in collective living and co-ownership, and just in general in building a more holistic, a more supportive, a more nurturing housing environment, now that we've all been stuck indoors for a year without having the ability to go out and meet our friends externally. How do you see the COVID shift affecting our housing and affecting this collectivity, both on the good and the bad, right? We're both afraid of other people, and we need them close to us at the same time.
Yeah, both the good and the bad have occurred in the context of the collective I'm currently in. And especially at the beginning last year, in March, when the travel restrictions were announced and we had this kind of lockdown and everything really kind of quieted down, and people were staying at home, it was such a blessing to live in this home. There were 5 adults here, and we had fun together. We ate together, we talked together, we had this kind of fellowship and camaraderie. We were, of course, still living our lives and doing the work that we were doing, and to the extent that we were able to do it. And, we shared a TV series or show, we'd have occasional viewing times together. But it was a real blessing to live together. And I think we all kind of appreciated that closeness and that sense of community that we had. And that's really, is a great example of one of the things that drew me into collective living in the first place, is having that sense of community. And I think it sort of really highlights the importance and also one of the benefits of shared living that you get is comes out of the close proximity you have with other people. In psychology, you could refer to it as your propinquity. Like it's that you happen to run into one another on your way to have a night snack, or on your way to see if the mail came, or going down for lunch, or whatever it might be, out in the garden. And that these kind of unplanned moments of connection and interaction, I think, really help sustain our sense of community over time. So sense of community, of course, occurs in the context of a group doing something together, where you have the synergy and the fun, or like a party or a gathering or a Thanksgiving potluck. Like that's really, really helpful. And then I think in addition to it is just these little one-to-one encounters that occur, that really build that feeling of connection and the feeling of belonging incrementally, one by one, bit by bit, interaction by interaction, greeting by greeting. And I think that's really important. And I think that the pandemic in some ways has slowed us down a little bit and brought us, maybe many of us, a little bit closer to home and spending a little bit more time in our neighborhoods. And I don't know how it's been for you, but for me, this past year, I have said hello to more strangers in my neighborhood than I have in several years put together. More people out in the park, more people on the sidewalk, more people doing stuff in their yard. And I think it's really been a kind of a lovely thing. Ironically, in the midst of such hardship, and of course, I understand too that so many people are so isolated and so desperately lonely, who don't happen to have the blessing of living the way I do, or happen to live in a neighborhood where you would encounter one another. But I think many of those encounters have occurred both in the context of my home, but not just in my home, then in my neighborhood too, when I'm out and taking a walk, to the park and back.
And have you experienced the flip side? I mean, I've heard stories of no one had to ask the questions of safety and how you're going to live your life before this. So I've heard stories of collectives having challenges on differential bubbles and safety protocols between different members. Have you had that experience in your collective yet?
Yeah, we have, and both in terms of the challenges that it creates for finding new people, and and there's not that also the pressure for the rental market is quite a bit reduced. There's a lot more availability, and there's a lot less movement happening, a lot less people coming in from overseas, a lot fewer students coming because the campuses are closed, all that kind of stuff. So that's had a direct and clear impact. And then also sort of not all being on the same page when it comes to thinking about, okay, what does it mean to be sort of safe? What are the basic protocols of hand washing that we think are important? And so we kind of lost one of our housemates, or it was kind of a mutual agreement that we just weren't on the same page when it came to that kind of stuff. And that was sort of the end of that person's tenure in the household. So yeah, so I think it sort of opens up another avenue for complications to occur. And not everyone is on the same page when it comes to these kind of beliefs about whether it's basic things like washing hands, or how they think about germs and vulnerability, and is this how impactful is this particular virus, and what precautions need to be taken. So yeah, so these are conversations that need to occur, and that I think they're best dealt with kind of directly and upfront. And so we do have these conversations very early on in our roommate screening process. And we say, this is how we handle it. This is how we want to handle it when they come for a trial dinner. We're eating outside on the patio. We have some propane heater set up. We have like little white, Christmas lights set up, in the rooftop over the patio. But we're going to sort of be also kind of safe with respect to this virus for the time being, until we feel, that we're in the clear with someone, and then we kind of merge our bubbles, so to speak.
Wonderful.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so I'm cognizant of time. So what I'm going to do is just close us up officially so that people cannot feel guilty as they sneak away. But then encourage folks to just kind of have an open conversation. Feel free to unmute yourself, ask questions, make comments, whatever queries or quibbles, whatever you'd like to add to us here. So just to close up, again, thank you all definitely for coming, and encourage you to check out the resources that are on the CoHo BC website, our guide to co-ownership. If you are looking to live collectively and want to find partners, we have a survey which allows us to do a little bit of matchmaking. And there's a new app out there called Sharetini that you can get on to try to find partners. I think CoHo is a collective of professionals with experience. So, come find people for questions about real estate, call me, questions about law, call our lawyers, and be in touch with myself or Collin with any questions or follow-up you might have. We have, I said, upcoming events, so please do sign up and join us. You've all been added to the CoHo email list if you're not on it already. If you're not interested in co-ownership, just unsubscribe. We won't take offense, but we hope you'll come back for future things. So that's the official end to our event. And really big thank you to Collin for your time, for your energy, for your expertise, for your enthusiasm, and encourage everyone to stick around for a little bit, chat, ask some questions, and then join us again for our next online social. Socials, we're learning how to do socials online, and Collin, your specialty, you're helping us do it as well. It sounds very exciting. So we're delighted that people could be here today. So thank you, and again, feel free to pop in.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah.
Thanks, Collin.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Very informative.
It was really nice to hear. It normalized my life a little bit.
I'm glad.
Yeah, I don't get to have this conversation or hear other people talk about this and have it sound so like casual. Everybody thinks I'm nuts. So, my families and things, they don't, what do you mean you share your house with all these people? Yeah, but same as me, I couldn't imagine COVID without my house. And it's been a blessing. I've got a 15-year-old that's super bonded to some people in their 20s. And it's been a savior for all of us to have chosen this way of life. It was tricky for 5 years, but through COVID, it was like the best thing ever.
Yeah, I share that feeling too. And are you living in a place you're renting, or are you?
I own a house that I've been sharing collectively for, we've just passed our 5-year mark, which is like, woo woo. And yeah. And my husband and I bought the house with the intention of sharing it with community, and we didn't know what that was going to look like. And about halfway through our idea, our kids turned into teenagers, and then it got a little tricky. So I moved my family out of the house, but kept living there part-time and sharing it. And we've just gotten bolder, and our process is very similar to yours, Collin, except for we haven't done the sleepover. So, but we do have a big questionnaire, and I've been questioning whether it's valid or not. But
yeah,
anyway,
that's a good question. Like, are those questionnaires valid? Because sometimes people tick off the right boxes, they say the right things, and yet it doesn't gel, or it doesn't work out. As great as you would hope.
Yeah, it's interesting to look back at what they say versus who they are. Yeah.
Exactly, and I think that's where you get the benefit of the sleepover, and then and it takes a little bit of focus on your part too, to just watch the behavior, allow people to say whatever they're going to say, and just watch how they are, because that's typically how they show up. Yeah, we had one person who we just loved, and they were so excited, but they were like, well, and I said, well, like, let's do this conversation, and then, we'll take it, one step at a time. Says, oh no, I'm just, I'm coming into Vancouver. I'm only going to be there, for a short amount of time. And would there be any way I could see the house? And would there be any way I could just do dinner? And, could we just kind of do this, kind of handle it all now? And so we're just like, okay, like we have this emergency house meeting to accommodate all the kind of urgency about it, and we just all blown away by how great the person was. And it turned out that that person's way of being in the house was identical to that. Like everything was in a rush. It had to be right away. It had to be zoom in and, oh, gotta go zoom out. And so had we just paid attention to the behavior, we would have seen like, okay, this is what we're gonna get. Yeah, it's really interesting. But I think like at that time, like I was really blown away by the answers to the questions, and the personality that was in front of me, which was lovely. But it was what we ended up living with was someone who just didn't have enough time to kind of accommodate how we typically did things with, always had to be sort of on the go and zooming in and zooming out. Yeah. So
anyone else want to share or ask a question?
It's Liza again. I just want to say awesome job, Collin. It's I mean, not that I'm biased or anything, because I've watched you in this space for a long time. Yeah, just great to hear you sharing your experience with your collective households, and just great information, and your process is great. And having been in a co-housing space with someone who wants everybody to check off all the lists, right? It's kind of like you can check off all the lists you want, but it doesn't really mean anything in the end. So I like your more kind of organic process. It's it just, yeah, like you've said, how people show up for 5 minutes is how they show up for life. So you've got really great instincts, and I think it's important to remind us to follow those when we're putting our houses together.
Yeah, I think so. Thank you, Liza. And it's true, because everything that people reveal about themselves is going to be informative in that respect. Like, do they come on time, or do they, how do they answer the question you asked for when you put the question out to them? How were you treated, when they came to look at the place or met you? All these things, do you just need to really look at like, okay, how is this working? And because it reveals ultimately the kind of person or the kind of stuff that you're going to have to live with is the behavior and the action.
I think, Collin, I think the theme of your whole talk in the end, I think is a lot the theme of CoHo as a whole, which is deliberate process. And that people jump into this because they love the idea, and that is wonderful. But unless you have a deliberate process, I mean, I won't say you're setting yourself up for failure, but you're setting yourself up for challenges. And if you can have a process in advance, if you can have, in our case, to have the professionals who can help you ask the right questions and buy the right property and get the right legal agreements and spend time having the proper conversations, it's a little easier on the rental front. But you've created a really wonderful process, and it doesn't have to be that exact process, but whatever it is, to make sure that you are everyone getting in is making the right choice. They know what they're getting into. They understand the culture of the house, what is and isn't being shared, what the exit strategy is if it's not going to work, et cetera, et cetera.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think it's an area too within which there's an opportunity to take leadership. And I think sometimes, when we're thinking about sharing and collectivity, we think like, okay, well, let's kind of have a group meeting and let's no one person run it and let's all, say what we want kind of thing. And so we end up in these situations where we don't have a structure that facilitates equality or engagement or participation. It becomes more like a free-for-all, and then we kind of lack a good, healthy process that would allow us to kind of articulate what matters. And so I think it's okay, even if one individual has a vision for, this is the kind of shared place I would like to have. I want to be in a house. I want to have it that we share our food and we share our meals or whatever it is. And you can put that vision out there, articulate it, and then you can see if that attracts other people on board to you. And if you put out a vision that enables that kind of collectivity and cooperation, a vision that will help sustain a sense of community, then that's brilliant. And so that sort of your leadership there can be rewarded because you attract to you people who are on board with that vision, as opposed to kind of starting with nothing and sort of having a brainstorm of kind of, well, anything goes kind of thing.
Any advice for people who are trying to convince a landlord that it's okay to rent to 5 separate adults in their property? They're going to actually probably take better care of it, because they're a deliberative community.
Oh, wow.
I've heard that it's a challenge for people in these collective homes to find this. We keep hearing about these anecdotal stories of people, renting 4,000, 6,000 square foot mansions and really getting great value and great space. But you also hear that it's very hard to actually get those spaces because nobody wants to rent to a bunch of strangers or in that context.
Yeah.
Have you dealt with this?
I think one of the benefits our landlord gets out of this is she doesn't have to care about the tenants who move in and out, right? We handle that. She doesn't have to put the listing on the market, or, she gets the full rent, and we handle the financial responsibility for the entire household as far as that goes. So it creates a lot of freedom for the landlord if you have a responsible core group. And I think not all groups of tenants would necessarily be accountable or responsible in that way. So, but I do think when you have this kind of intentionality about collective living and community, as opposed to kind of in anything goes, everyone's free to do whatever. I think the more communal style, it's a lot more akin to kind of old-fashioned family style, and I think a landlord should feel a little bit relieved about that, as opposed to concerned.
We call ourselves family. We're not quite friends only, and we're not quite family, but we're pretty darn close to both.
Yeah, and there you go. And certainly I feel kind of a much greater sense of security in the context of how I live than I think I would if I lived on my, in a room behind a closed locked door all the time and had no idea what was going on elsewhere in the households.
Thank you for tonight. This was really nice. Have a nice evening.
You're welcome. I hope it's helpful, and I really hope it's helpful to the people who are interested. And
Wonderful.
and I'd be happy to talk with people more. If they want to contact me outside of the context of this meeting, that would be great. If people are looking to kind of give it a try in the context of a household such as ours, I can help connect them either with ours or other places I know about too.
Wonderful. Well, once again, thank you so much. It was really an engaging conversation, and we will stay in touch. And everyone, again, your information is right there. Collin V at telus.net. My information is right there. If you want to talk real estate, information's right there if you want to talk co-ownership. Thank you all. Have a lovely evening. And thank you one last time, Collin, for joining us.
Invitation. It was my pleasure.
Great.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Collin. Thanks, Noam.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
There you go.